Okay, let's say we wanted to increment and decrement some integers. I'm going to install the Angular CLI. Things are much faster when you speed them up 1000%. And then I'm going to check what version I'm using. Brand new, fresh version, right off the presses, version 12 of Angular. Create a new project called Counter. Let it install the packages, sped up again for your convenience. Open it up in Visual Studio Code. We'll start up the development server, see what we have. It opens in our browser and we see the Angular homepage, the welcome getting started page. I'm going to delete all that and create a simple user interface, simply 2 buttons and a place to display the current value. One button will allow us to decrement, the other increment the integer, and we'll display it. I'll hard code a 0 in for right now. On the component itself, I'll create a little property to hold the current value of the integer. And then 2 methods. One will allow me to increment that, and the other decrement. Cook up the user interface, show the current value, and hook the buttons up. We'll call the methods on the TypeScript class. Decrement and increment. So if that's all you wanted, we're already done. But let's see how complicated we can make it. I'm going to install a couple dependencies, ngrx store and ngrx store dev tools. And then create a new reducer file. So just a TypeScript file. I'm going to put in a reducers folder called counterreducer.ts. I'll say what we want the value of this state to be by default. We'll put 42 there as a test number so we can make sure everything's hooked up right. Then I'm going to create a reducer function using a utility from the ngrx library called createReducer that takes that initial state. I'll export that as a name function so everything builds properly. It will take as an argument the state, which will either be number or undefined in the first call, and an action and return a number. And we'll just delegate all the work to our createReducer function. In the app module, we'll hook it up using the store module for root method and describing our application state. Here, just an anonymous object that says there's a thing called count and it's handled by the counter reducer. I just made that name count up. And then hook up the store dev tools. So if I open up the dev tools, you can install those from the extensions store for both Chrome and Edge. You can see we have an application state that says the count is currently 42. There. So let's see if we can get that same 42 out of our state onto our component. I'm going to replace the hard-coded value here with an observable of a number. In the constructor, I'm going to ask Angular to provide me a reference to the store as a service using that same interface we saw inside of the app module. We can no longer increment and decrement that because it's an observable. It's read-only. A good place to retrieve that value is in the ng-on-init method. So I'll implement on-init. And I'll tell the store I would like to observe that value by selecting it from this state. We'll change it in the template to say we want to use that observable, and since it's an observable, we have to subscribe with the async pipe. And now, there it is, that 42. I think we can change that back to 0 now that we know it's reading the right data. So I suppose we would want to be able to increment and decrement, and it's pretty fulfilling to see that there, but let's make the buttons do something, and to do that, we'll actually create some actions. These actions will be dispatched from the user interface. So I'm going to add a new file, put it in a folder called actions, and we'll call it counteractions.ts. I'm going to hurriedly speed up and show these. I'm going to import another little helper from ngrx called create action. These will be pretty basic actions. They just are commands, increment the number or decrement the number. So we'll throw those in there real quick. And then in the component, import those. And then in our decrement and increment methods, dispatch those to the store. Making sure we're dispatching the right ones. We'll go take a look at the dev tools in the browser to make sure everything's hooked up properly. You'll be able to see in the inspector below, every time I click a button, an action will get dispatched. Be able to look at that action, and they seem to be hooked up properly. Now, obviously, the number's not changing yet. We have to put the logic inside that reducer function to say what should happen in the case of an increment or a decrement. So I import on from ngrx store, input those same set of actions in my reducer. And then for each of those actions, I'll add to that reducer function a little bit of logic that says, given this state, when it's an increment, return a new state that's the old state plus 1. And with decrement, given the state, return a new state, which is the current number, state minus 1. And at this point, we should be good to go. Incrementing and decrementing. You can see the diff between one action and the next in the dev tools. You can even rewind, put your hands in the air as if you just don't care, and it will replay everything you did. We now have global state.